Welcome to Whispers and Footsteps, the home of mysteries and clever deductions. If suspense and sharp minds are what you love, you're in the right place. Tell us where you're watching from. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now, let the mystery begin. Murder is a matter of order. Chapter 1. A disturbance of routine. Hercule Poirot disliked disorder, but he disliked unexpected disorder even more. Belmont House, he reflected with approval, was a place after his own heart. It stood a little apart from the road, dignified and reserved, its pale stone facade softened by carefully trimmed hedges, and a gravel drive raked with almost military precision. Nothing here was accidental. Even the ivy climbing the southern wall appeared to have been instructed where to grow. Poirot had arrived 2 days earlier at the invitation of Sir Reginald Hawthorne, a retired civil servant of some renown, whose career in the Home Office had earned him both a knighthood and a formidable reputation for efficiency. Sir Reginald was a tall, spare man with iron-grey hair and a voice that never rose above a measured tone. He spoke, like everything else in his life, with economy. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," Sir Reginald had said on their first meeting, consulting his pocket watch even as he extended his hand, "you will find that Belmont House runs on principles rather than impulses." Poirot, smoothing his moustaches, had smiled. "Ah, but principles, Sir Reginald, are only as interesting as the humans who follow them." The household, Poirot soon observed, functioned like a well-regulated clock. Breakfast was served at precisely 8:15, luncheon at 1, tea at 6, dinner at 7:30, no earlier and no later. The servants moved with quiet efficiency, anticipating needs before they were voiced. Even conversation seemed to pause respectfully at certain hours. There were 4 other residents besides Sir Reginald himself. His daughter, Miss Clara Hawthorne, a pale, serious woman in her early 30s, possessed a manner that suggested lifelong restraint. She spoke politely, but her eyes often betrayed impatience. Poirot noticed how she glanced at the clock before replying to questions, as though time itself were a supervisor. Mr. Edward Miles, Sir Reginald's secretary, was a neat, anxious man with ink-stained fingers and an apologetic smile. He carried papers everywhere and seemed uncomfortable whenever he was not at his employer's side. Poirot remarked privately that Mr. Miles resembled a man who feared chaos more than dishonesty. Mrs. Pembroke, the housekeeper, was a woman of middle age with a soft voice and watchful eyes. She took pride in Belmont House and referred to its routines with almost maternal affection. "Sir Reginald likes things done properly," she explained more than once, as though propriety were a moral virtue. Lastly, there was Julian Hawthorne, Sir Reginald's nephew, who arrived late on the second evening. He was charming, careless in his dress, and carried himself with an ease that contrasted sharply with the house's rigid discipline. Poirot noted at once how Julian's presence unsettled the others like a loose thread in a perfectly sewn seam. On the third evening, Poirot sat in the drawing-room shortly before 6 o'clock, sipping his tea and admiring the symmetry of the furniture. A tall clock stood against the far wall, its pendulum swinging with hypnotic regularity. Tick-tock. Mrs. Pembroke entered, glanced at the clock, and frowned slightly. "Sir Reginald will be down directly," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. At 6, precisely, Clara Hawthorne took her usual seat by the window. Mr. Miles positioned himself near the side table, papers already arranged. Julian lounged in an armchair, tapping his foot. 6-1, 6-2. Poirot noticed the silence before anyone else did. It was not the silence of rest, but of expectation unfulfilled. "Is father unwell?" Clara asked at last, her voice controlled. Mrs. Pembroke hesitated. "Sir Reginald has never been late for tea, Not once in 20 years. Poirot set down his cup gently. Never, madam? He asked. Never, she repeated firmly. 6-5. Mr. Miles cleared his throat. Perhaps he is finishing his correspondence? Poirot observed that Mr. Miles avoided looking at the clock. Julian laughed lightly. Surely the world won't end if the old gentleman misses a cup of tea? Poirot's eyes flicked toward him. On the contrary, monsieur, he said mildly, in a house built upon routine, the smallest deviation is most significant. Mrs. Pembroke excused herself and went upstairs. The others remained seated, each with their own thoughts. Poirot studied them discreetly. Clara's hands were clasped too tightly in her lap. Mr. Miles dabbed his brow with a handkerchief. Julian stopped tapping his foot. At 6:10, Mrs. Pembroke returned, her face drained of colour. Sir Reginald is not in his bedroom, she said, nor in the study. She stopped, swallowed, and corrected herself. The study door is open. Poirot rose at once, smoothing his jacket. Then, madame, we must all go together. They found Sir Reginald seated at his desk, his posture upright, his hands folded neatly before him. At first glance, he appeared merely to be resting. But Poirot, with the instinct born of long experience, knew otherwise. Death, he reflected, had come quietly and on time. Yet as his gaze moved about the room, noting the arrangement of papers, the position of the chair, the clock on the mantelpiece that read 8:03, Poirot felt the first stirrings of unease. Order, yes, but not perfect order. And for Hercule Poirot, that made all the difference. Chapter 2. Death at precisely 8. Hercule Poirot stood very still in the doorway of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's study. To the untrained eye, the scene before him appeared almost serene. Sir Reginald sat upright at his broad mahogany desk, his back straight, his chin slightly lowered, as though he had merely paused in the midst of his work. One hand rested upon a stack of neatly aligned papers, the other lay flat beside a silver paperweight. The lamp on the desk was switched off. The room smelled faintly of polish and old leather. It was, Poirot reflected, a picture of calm respectability. And yet, death was present, unmistakable and absolute. Mon Dieu, murmured Mrs. Pembroke behind him, her hand flying to her mouth. Sir Reginald! Clara Hawthorne stepped forward, then stopped abruptly, as though an invisible barrier had been placed between her and her father. Her face had gone pale, but her expression was curiously controlled. Mr. Edward Miles hovered uncertainly near the door, twisting his handkerchief. Julian Hawthorne leaned against the wall, his earlier flippancy quite gone. For once, he was silent. Poirot advanced into the room with measured steps. He did not touch the body. Instead, his eyes moved slowly, deliberately, absorbing every detail. No sign of a struggle, he said quietly. That's right, said Julian at last. He looks peaceful. Peaceful, yes, Poirot agreed. But peace is not the same as innocence, monsieur. Mrs. Pembroke hurried to the bell and rang for assistance. Within minutes, the household was in subdued motion. A local doctor, summoned from the village, arrived promptly and conducted a brief examination. Heart failure, he announced. Sir Reginald was not a young man. These things happen. Poirot inclined his head politely. At what time, do you estimate, did death occur? The doctor consulted his watch. I should say shortly before 8 o'clock. Poirot's eyes flicked to the clock on the mantelpiece. Its hands stood at 8:03. How interesting, he murmured. No one responded. The doctor, assuming the matter settled, began to gather his things. Poirot watched him go, then turned back to the room. It is fortunate, Poirot said mildly, that Sir Reginald was discovered so promptly. A man so exact would not have appreciated delay. Clara drew herself up. Are you suggesting? I suggest nothing, mademoiselle, Poirot interrupted gently. I observe. He approached the desk. The papers beneath Sir Reginald's hand were aligned with mathematical precision. Poirot lifted an eyebrow. A man who values order, he said, would not leave his work incomplete. Yet these documents, he tapped them lightly. They appear to have been reviewed and replaced, almost as though he had finished earlier than usual. Mr. Miles cleared his throat. Sir Reginald often worked in advance. Ah, yes, said Poirot. Often, but not always. He bent slightly to examine the chair. One leg was angled away from the desk as though it had been nudged aside. A small thing, Poirot remarked, but telling. Sir Reginald would not have left his chair askew. Julian shifted his weight. Surely that means nothing? Poirot smiled faintly. In matters of death, monsieur, nothing means nothing. The clock drew his attention once more. He stepped closer, peering at it as though it were a suspect in its own right. This clock, he said, is slow. Mrs. Pembroke frowned. That cannot be. Sir Reginald insisted all clocks be checked weekly. Precisely, said Poirot, which suggests that this one was adjusted recently. A silence fell. Clara spoke at last, her voice steady. Are you implying someone tampered with the clock? I imply, said Poirot softly, that time is very important in this house. The police arrived shortly thereafter, bringing with them the inevitable atmosphere of official intrusion. Statements were taken, doors were examined, windows were inspected. Everything, it seemed, was exactly as it should be. Too exactly. Poirot stood aside, observing. He noticed how Mr. Miles answered questions with excessive detail, as though afraid of omission. He saw how Mrs. Pembroke kept glancing at the clock in the hall, even now. He noted how Julian avoided the study entirely, while Clara remained rigidly present, her gaze never leaving her father's still form. Later, when the body had been respectfully covered and removed, Poirot lingered behind. He walked slowly around the room, hands clasped behind his back, his face thoughtful. A death without violence, he murmured. A house without disorder. And yet, he stopped beside the desk and picked up the silver paperweight. Beneath it lay a faint ring, where the wood had not been exposed to light. The object was moved, Poirot said to himself, and replaced. Why? He straightened, his eyes bright with quiet intensity. Murder is not always loud, he said softly. Sometimes it wears the disguise of habit. Outside, the clock in the hall chimed 8:30. Poirot listened carefully. The wrong time, he said at last, and therefore the right beginning. Chapter 3. The Orderly Suspects. Hercule Poirot preferred to conduct his inquiries while the atmosphere of a house still held the imprint of recent shock. People, he believed, revealed themselves most honestly before their emotions had time to arrange themselves into neat defences. Belmont House, though outwardly unchanged, now breathed unease beneath its polished surfaces. The interviews were arranged quite naturally, according to Sir Reginald Hawthorne's former schedule. Poirot noted this with mild irony. Even in death, the man's habits ruled the household. Miss Clara Hawthorne was the first to be shown into the morning room. She entered with measured steps, her back straight, her hands folded neatly before her. She sat exactly where she had been invited to sit, neither more nor less. You lived here with your father for many years, mademoiselle, Poirot began gently. All my life, Clara replied. Until now. Her voice held no tremor, but Poirot observed the faint tension at the corners of her mouth. Your father was a man of strong principles, Poirot continued. Did you ever find them difficult? Clara's eyes flicked briefly to the window. He believed discipline was kindness. I did not always agree. Yet you obeyed. One does when obedience is expected. She hesitated. I loved my father, but love does not prevent fatigue. Poirot nodded sympathetically. And last evening, where were you at 8 o'clock? In the drawing room, as always. Tea is at 6, reading at 7, quiet reflection thereafter. Always? Poirot asked. Yes. She frowned. Is that unusual? Poirot smiled politely. Not at all. Mr. Edward Miles arrived next, clutching a folder as though it were a lifeline. He sat perched on the edge of his chair, his eyes darting nervously about the room. You were Sir Reginald's secretary for many years, yes? Poirot asked. 8, Mr. Miles said quickly. 8 years, 4 months, and you knew his habits intimately, Poirot finished. Mr. Miles swallowed. Every detail, sir. Sir Reginald believed preparation prevented error. A belief you shared? Absolutely. Mr. Miles wiped his brow. Disorder makes me uncomfortable. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Discomfort is very instructive, monsieur. He asked the question that had already become familiar. Mr. Miles answered at once. At 8 o'clock I was in my room preparing the next day's correspondence. I retire promptly at 9. You heard nothing unusual? No, nothing. He paused. Sir Reginald disliked interruption. Mrs. Pembroke came next. She folded her hands in her apron and spoke with quiet dignity. I have served Sir Reginald for 15 years, she said. He valued punctuality, kept the house peaceful. Did it? Poirot asked mildly. She looked startled. Why, yes. We all knew our place. And if someone failed to keep time? Her lips tightened. Sir Reginald would remind them. Poirot made a small note. And last evening? I was in the pantry, preparing trays for the next day. At 8 precisely? Yes, monsieur, I always check the clock. Poirot inclined his head. Always. Last came Julian Hawthorne. He strolled in with an air of studied ease, though his eyes were watchful. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, Julian said lightly. I hear I'm last in line. Order is important, Poirot replied, his tone bland. Julian laughed. Then I fear I disappoint. You arrived late to the house, Poirot observed. Did that trouble your uncle? Julian shrugged. Uncle Reginald disliked surprises, but I was family. Family is often the greatest surprise of all, Poirot said quietly. Julian's smile faltered. I was in the drawing room at 8, with the others. Indeed, Poirot agreed. You all were. The interviews concluded, Poirot retired to the library, where the faint smell of pipe tobacco still lingered. He reviewed his notes slowly. Every alibi aligned perfectly. Every account fitted the timetable. No one had been alone with Sir Reginald, at least not officially. Too neat. Poirot rose and walked to the hall clock, comparing it with his pocket watch. 3 minutes slow. Mon ami, he murmured to himself. When everyone agrees upon the time, one must ask who set the clock. He considered the suspects again, not as individuals, but as creatures shaped by habit. Clara, restrained by duty. Miles, enslaved by order. Mrs. Pembroke, loyal to routine. Julian, resisting control. Each had motive enough to resent Sir Reginald's authority, but resentment alone did not kill so cleanly. No, Poirot said softly, this crime is not of passion. It is of alignment. He closed his notebook with a decisive click. In Belmont House, order reigned supreme. And somewhere within that order, Poirot was certain, lay the truth, carefully timed, carefully placed, and waiting to be disturbed. Chapter 4. A schedule too perfect. Hercule Poirot believed that papers spoke as clearly as people, sometimes more so. They did not blush, nor did they lie for comfort. They waited, patient and exact, for the mind that would listen. It was shortly after luncheon when Poirot requested permission to examine Sir Reginald Hawthorne's private papers. Clara Hawthorne agreed at once, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "My father kept everything," she said. "Too much, perhaps." "Order, mademoiselle," Poirot replied gently. "Is never too much until it is." The study had been returned to its former appearance. The desk shone, the chair stood straight, the clock ticked faithfully, though Poirot noticed it had been reset. He took out his pocket watch and compared the time. Accurate now, conveniently so. He seated himself and began with the desk calendar, Sir Reginald's famous schedule, written in a small, precise hand. Each day was divided into blocks: correspondence, reading, walks, consultations, rest. Poirot traced the lines with a gloved finger. "Remarkable," he murmured. The man lived by geometry. Then he stopped. On the day of Sir Reginald's death, one entry had been altered. The ink was the same shade, the handwriting carefully mimicked, but the pressure was different, slightly heavier, almost imperceptibly so. Poirot smiled to himself. "Ah," he said softly, "the hand that hesitates." The original entry had read, "Review Correspondence, 7:30 AT." Beneath it, faint but present, was the shadow of an erasure. The revised note read, "Private reading." Private reading, Poirot knew, was Sir Reginald's term for solitude. "Someone wished him alone," Poirot said, "at a very particular moment." A knock sounded at the door. Mr. Edward Miles entered, his expression anxious. "I wondered if you required anything, Monsieur Poirot?" "Perhaps," Poirot said mildly. "Can you tell me, did Sir Reginald often amend his schedule?" Mr. Miles stiffened. "No, never. He believed consistency was essential." "Indeed," said Poirot, "and yet here we have an amendment." Mr. Miles peered at the page, his lips tightening. "That is, curious." "Curious?" Poirot agreed. "And when did Sir Reginald make this change?" I could not say." Mr. Miles wiped his hands on his trousers. "He kept such matters to himself." "Of course," said Poirot. "Control is most effective when exercised alone." After Mr. Miles withdrew, Poirot continued his examination. He found the household timetable pinned inside a drawer, typed "Revised Monthly," initialed by Sir Reginald. Even the servants' breaks were timed. This house, Poirot reflected, does not merely function, it obeys. Later that afternoon, Poirot strolled through the garden with Mrs. Pembroke. The paths were trimmed, the flower beds symmetrical. "Sir Reginald supervised everything," she said proudly. "Even the roses." "Did he ever permit exception?" Poirot asked. She hesitated. "Only when he deemed it efficient." "And inefficiency?" Mrs. Pembroke shook her head. He could not tolerate it. They paused near the sundial. Poirot studied it thoughtfully. "Time," he said, "is a curious master. Some command it, others are commanded by it." Mrs. Pembroke looked uneasy. "You speak strangely, monsieur." Poirot smiled. "I think strangely." That evening, Poirot invited Clara and Julian Hawthorne to the drawing-room. Tea was served at precisely 6. Clara poured with careful precision. Julian, noticeably, poured his without looking. "You do not fear spilling," Poirot observed. Julian shrugged. "Life's untidy." "Ah," said Poirot. "And Belmont House?" Julian laughed. "The opposite. Uncle Reginald tried to tame it, and us." Clara stiffened. He believed order was necessary. "For whom?" Poirot asked softly. A silence followed. "May I ask?" Poirot continued. Who knew Sir Reginald would be alone between 7:30 and 8? Clara frowned. Everyone. It was his habit. Precisely, Poirot said. Habits are public knowledge. They are also vulnerabilities. He rose and walked to the mantelpiece, where the clock now ticked steadily. Someone, Poirot went on, did not disrupt the routine. They relied upon it. Julian's expression darkened. You think this was planned? I think, said Poirot, that the plan was the routine itself. He returned to his chair, steepling his fingers. When everything runs like clockwork, one need only adjust a cog. Later, alone in his room, Poirot reviewed the day's discoveries. The altered schedule, the universal certainty of Sir Reginald's habits, the ease with which solitude had been assured. No struggle, Poirot murmured. No interruption, only time. He closed his notebook gently. Murder, he said, is not always an act of chaos. Sometimes it is an act of obedience. And somewhere in Belmont House, he was certain, someone had obeyed Sir Reginald's rules to deadly perfection. Chapter 5. The First False Conclusion. Hercule Poirot was present when the police arrived to make their decision, though no one had officially invited him to witness it. He stood a little apart in the hall at Belmont House, hands folded neatly behind his back, observing with polite detachment as Superintendent Walsh cleared his throat and addressed the assembled household. We have considered the evidence, Walsh said, with the air of a man who enjoys finality. Motive, opportunity, and behavior all point in one direction. Julian Hawthorne, who had been leaning against the banister with studied carelessness, straightened slightly. His smile did not entirely fade, but something brittle entered it. This should be interesting, he said. Walsh ignored the remark. Mr. Julian Hawthorne, you were in financial difficulty. You arrived unexpectedly at the house. You openly resented Sir Reginald's authority. Several witnesses observed your agitation on the evening of his death. Julian gave a short laugh. Agitation is hardly a hanging offence. Nevertheless, Walsh continued, you had access, motive, and no convincing explanation for certain gaps in your movements. Clara Hawthorne turned sharply. Gaps? He was with us? At the beginning of the evening, Walsh said evenly. Not throughout. Two constables stepped forward. For a moment, no one spoke. The clock in the hall ticked loudly, each second sounding like a small hammer blow. Poirot's eyes were fixed on Julian. He noted the way the young man's shoulders stiffened, not in guilt, but in affront. You are making a mistake, Julian said coolly. But I suppose mistakes are part of order too. Poirot inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging a private thought. Julian was led away. The sound of the door closing behind him seemed to echo through the house, unsettling the symmetry that Sir Reginald had once prized. Later that afternoon, Poirot sought out Superintendent Walsh in the study. You are satisfied? Poirot asked gently. Walsh nodded. It fits. He's careless, impulsive, and he stood to gain... Ah, said Poirot. To gain what, precisely? Walsh frowned. Money. Sir Reginald controlled the purse strings. Poirot reached for a paper on the desk. Permit me one question, Superintendent. Have you examined Sir Reginald's will? Walsh hesitated. Not yet. It seemed unnecessary. On the contrary, Poirot said softly, it is essential. That evening, with Clara's reluctant consent, the solicitor was summoned. The will was produced, a precise document, dated 5 years earlier, leaving the bulk of Sir Reginald's estate to his daughter, with modest provisions for Julian and certain allowances for loyal service. So Julian's motive is clear, Walsh said. Poirot lifted a finger. But wait. He turned to the solicitor. Monsieur, Was Sir Reginald considering any changes? The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. In fact, yes. He requested a private consultation last week. Clara's face drained of colour. He said nothing to me. Sir Reginald intended to revise the will, the solicitor continued. I was instructed to prepare amendments. Walsh leaned forward. In whose favour? The solicitor hesitated. I was not told, only that the matter was urgent and confidential. Poirot's eyes sparkled with quiet interest. Then, Poirot said, we must ask ourselves, who feared that change? Later, Poirot walked alone through the garden, his mind busy. Julian's arrest troubled him, not from sentiment but from logic. No, Poirot murmured. Too loud, too clumsy. Julian Hawthorne, with his untidy habits and open defiance, did not possess the temperament required for a crime of such precision. The murder of Sir Reginald had been silent, exact, obedient to time. Murder is not only about desire, Poirot reflected. It is about character. He recalled Julian's disdain for schedules, his indifference to clocks. Such a man might kill in passion, but not in alignment. Returning indoors, Poirot encountered Mrs. Pembroke arranging flowers with meticulous care. A terrible business, she said quietly, but perhaps order will return now. Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. Order, he said, returns only when truth does. That night, Poirot reviewed his notes, the altered schedule, the adjusted clock, the universal knowledge of Sir Reginald's solitude, and now the unannounced change to the will. One name recurred in his thoughts, not with accusation, but with possibility. Who benefits from order? Poirot asked himself. Who fears disorder most of all? He closed his notebook. The first conclusion, Poirot said softly, is rarely the correct one. Outside, the house settled into its familiar rhythms. Lights were extinguished at their appointed times. Doors were locked. Silence resumed its place. But Poirot knew that silence, like order, could be deceiving. And somewhere within Belmont House, the true murderer waited, confident, composed, and entirely convinced that the machine they had built would never betray them. Chapter 6. The Tyranny of Control. Hercule Poirot had always maintained that crimes were born not merely of opportunity, but of temperament. To understand the deed, one must first understand the mind that found it necessary. With Julian Hawthorne removed from the house and the air of Belmont House settling once more into its accustomed quiet, Poirot found the conditions ideal for observation. He began, as he often did, by listening. Belmont House, deprived of Sir Reginald's commanding presence, continued to function with remarkable efficiency. Meals arrived on time. Doors were opened and closed at fixed hours. Lights were extinguished with military punctuality. Yet there was a subtle change, a hesitation, a faint uncertainty, as though the mechanism no longer knew who had authority to wind it. Poirot noticed who suffered most from this uncertainty. Mr. Edward Miles, for instance, appeared increasingly strained. Poirot encountered him in the corridor shortly before luncheon, standing immobile before the wall clock, his brow furrowed. "It is 2 minutes fast," Mr. Miles muttered, adjusting his spectacles. "It should not be." "Should it not?" Poirot asked mildly. Mr. Miles jumped. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, I like things to be accurate." "Accuracy is admirable," said Poirot, "but flexibility is human." Mr. Miles smiled weakly. "Sir Reginald used to say that flexibility led to error." "Did he?" Poirot replied softly. Later, Poirot sought out Clara Hawthorne in the music room. She sat at the piano, her hands resting idly on the keys, though she did not play. "You do not practice today?" Poirot asked. Clara shook her head. "Father preferred silence at this hour." "And now?" She hesitated. "Now I do not know." Poirot took a seat nearby. "Tell me, mademoiselle, did your father ever permit disagreement?" She smiled faintly. "He permitted discussion until he had decided." "And when he decided?" "There was no appeal." Poirot nodded. "Authority is most comfortable when it believes itself benevolent." Clara's hands tightened. "You make him sound cruel." "Not cruel," Poirot corrected gently. "Certain." He rose and wandered to the mantel where a small, framed notice hung. Sir Reginald's household rules, typed and signed. "Certainty," Poirot continued, "can become a prison when it admits no exception." That afternoon, Poirot asked Mrs. Pembroke to accompany him through the servants' quarters. She did so willingly, though with visible unease. "Sir Reginald was fair," she said. "He expected standards, but he rewarded loyalty." "And fear?" Poirot asked. Mrs. Pembroke stopped. "Fear keeps one attentive." "Indeed," said Poirot. "It also keeps one silent." She said nothing more. As the day wore on, Poirot's thoughts arranged themselves with increasing clarity. The murder of Sir Reginald Hawthorne had not been an act of rage, nor even of desperation. It had been an act of continuity. He created a system, Poirot reflected, and someone believed the system more important than the man. That evening, Poirot dined alone with Clara and Mr. Miles. The absence of Julian created a conspicuous gap, like a missing note in a familiar melody. Mr. Miles spoke nervously. "With Sir Reginald gone, matters will change." "Change is inevitable," Poirot replied, "but change is frightening to those who thrive on order." Mr. Miles's fork paused mid-air. Poirot continued, his tone conversational. "Tell me, monsieur, did you ever fear dismissal?" Mr. Miles coloured. "Sir Reginald valued my service." "Did he?" Poirot asked lightly. "Enough to keep you indefinitely?" Silence answered him. Poirot leaned back. "A man who controls everything must eventually rearrange." Mr. Miles pushed back his chair. "Excuse me," he muttered, and left the table. Poirot watched him go, his expression unreadable. Later, alone in the study, Poirot examined Sir Reginald's desk once more. He opened a drawer he had previously ignored. Inside lay correspondence, letters of commendation, memoranda, and at the bottom, a folded note in Sir Reginald's hand. "Review, staff efficiency. No names, no date." Poirot smiled faintly. "Efficiency reviews," he murmured. "They inspire great loyalty and great terror." He replaced the note carefully. The truth, Poirot now believed, lay not in who hated Sir Reginald, but in who depended upon him. The person who had killed him had not sought freedom, but preservation. They had acted not to overthrow the system, but to maintain it, at least for a while longer. "Murder," Poirot said softly, "committed not in rebellion, but in obedience." He closed his eyes briefly, letting the image of the house settle in his mind, the clocks, the schedules, the quiet fear of disorder. The killer, Poirot concluded, is not the one who resisted control, but the one who embraced it. Outside, the hall clock chimed 9. Poirot opened his eyes. "Soon," he said calmly, "the order will collapse, and when it does, the truth will step forward, precisely on time." Chapter 7. The Quiet Clue. Hercule Poirot awoke that morning with the pleasant certainty that accompanies approaching clarity. The puzzle of Belmont House, which had so long presented itself as a flawless pattern, had begun, ever so slightly, to fray at the edges. It was not a dramatic revelation, nor a sudden stroke of genius. It was, rather, a quiet observation. And Poirot trusted quiet observations more than any other. He rose, adjusted his immaculate moustaches, and consulted his pocket watch. 7 minutes past 7. Exactly as expected. Downstairs, the house was already stirring. Mrs. Pembroke supervised breakfast with her usual precision, though Poirot noticed a new sharpness in her movements, as though she feared time itself might slip through her fingers. Clara Hawthorne entered the dining room precisely at 8, her expression composed but weary. Mr. Edward Miles followed moments later, slightly breathless, his eyes flicking immediately toward the mantel clock. "You are late, monsieur," Poirot remarked mildly. Mr. Miles stiffened. "Only by seconds." Poirot smiled. "Seconds are often decisive." Breakfast passed with polite conversation and little appetite. Poirot ate sparingly, his attention fixed not on the table, but on the room beyond it. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Too steadily. After the meal, Poirot excused himself and walked the length of the corridor, pausing deliberately at each clock he passed. One by one, he compared them with his pocket watch. All were accurate, all, that is, except one. The small clock outside Sir Reginald's study lagged behind by exactly 3 minutes. Poirot stood before it for some time, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression thoughtful. "So," he murmured, "you remain." Later that morning, he requested the presence of Mr. Miles in the study. The secretary entered nervously, smoothing his tie. "You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes," said Poirot pleasantly. "I wish to ask you about clocks." Mr. Miles blinked. "Clocks?" "Yes. Their maintenance, their adjustment." Poirot gestured toward the mantelpiece. "Sir Reginald valued accuracy. Who insured it?" Mr. Miles hesitated. "I, occasionally. Sir Reginald entrusted me with such matters." "Occasionally?" Poirot repeated. "And on the evening of Sir Reginald's death?" Mr. Miles shifted his weight. "I believe I adjusted that clock earlier in the day. It was running fast." "Fast?" Poirot asked gently. "Yes, efficiency demands precision." Poirot nodded. "Of course." He rose and moved closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me, monsieur, did Sir Reginald ever permit you to change his schedule without instruction?" Mr. Miles's face paled. "No, never." "And yet," Poirot continued softly, "his schedule was changed." Mr. Miles said nothing. Poirot dismissed him with a polite nod. When the door closed, Poirot returned to the clock and examined it carefully. The casing bore faint smudges, recently wiped. The adjustment knob was slightly askew. "A careful hand," Poirot said, "but not confident." That afternoon, Poirot gathered Clara and Mrs. Pembroke in the drawing room. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the precise arrangement of furniture. "May I ask you both something?" Poirot said conversationally. "On the evening of Sir Reginald's death, did either of you adjust a clock?" "No," Clara replied at once. "Never," said Mrs. Pembroke firmly. Poirot smiled. "As I thought." He rose and crossed the room, stopping beside the tall grandfather clock. He opened it gently, revealing the pendulum swinging with calm inevitability. "Sir Reginald," Poirot said, "trusted time because time obeyed him. He believed himself master of it." He turned back to them. "But one cannot master time without assistance?" Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Who in this house fears disorder most?" Mrs. Pembroke glanced instinctively toward the door. That evening, Poirot dined alone. He had declined company, preferring silence. He reviewed every detail once more, the altered schedule, the adjusted clock, the timing of death, the impending change to the will. 3 minutes, Poirot murmured. Always 3 minutes. 3 minutes, slow on the night of death. 3 minutes, slow still, a marker, a signature. He rose and walked to the study once more.
The room felt different now, not sinister but expectant. Poirot sat at the desk and imagined Sir Reginald there, checking his watch, content that the world was in order. "Your mistake," Poirot said softly, "was believing that order protects." He examined the drawer containing the correspondence. His fingers paused on the note marked "Review, Staff Efficiency." He smiled faintly. Fear, Poirot reflected, is the most punctual of emotions. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Clara stood at the door. "Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly, "will you tell us soon?" Poirot rose and bowed slightly. "Very soon, mademoiselle." As she left, Poirot glanced once more at the clock. Tick, tock. "It is nearly time," he said to the empty room.
And when the time is right, truth, like disorder, cannot be restrained. He straightened his jacket, his expression serene. The final arrangement, Poirot knew, was ready. All that remained was to reveal who had set the clock and why. Chapter 8. Murder is a matter of order. Hercule Poirot arranged the final gathering with the same quiet certainty that had guided him from the beginning. Belmont House was restored for the moment to its familiar symmetry. Chairs were placed with care in the drawing room. The fire burned evenly. The clocks, every one of them, kept perfect time. Perfect, that is, except for one. Clara Hawthorne sat near the window, her hands folded, her face pale but resolute. Mrs. Pembroke stood a little apart, stiff with apprehension. Superintendent Walsh occupied an armchair near the fireplace, his notebook ready. Mr. Edward Miles lingered by the door, composed but tense, his eyes never quite still. Poirot waited until the hall clock chimed 8. "Messieurs, mesdames," he said gently, "thank you for your punctuality. It is fitting." Walsh cleared his throat. "You said you had something to tell us, Monsieur Poirot?" "Indeed," Poirot replied. "I have something to explain." He moved to the mantelpiece and rested a hand upon the clock. Sir Reginald Hawthorne believed order was the highest virtue. He shaped this house and the people within it accordingly. Every habit, every hour, every silence was regulated. He turned, his gaze sweeping the room. "Such order creates efficiency. It also creates fear." Mrs. Pembroke drew a sharp breath. "The death of Sir Reginald appeared natural," Poirot continued. "A heart failure at precisely 8 o'clock. No struggle, no disturbance. But appearances, as we know, can be cultivated." Walsh leaned forward. "Are you saying it was murder?" "I am saying," Poirot replied,
"that it was planned." He lifted a small vial from his pocket and set it upon the table. A tasteless poison, administered in minute quantities over several days, introduced into Sir Reginald's evening medicine. Carefully measured, carefully timed. Clara gasped softly. "But who?" Poirot raised a finger. "Patience, mademoiselle." He crossed to the desk and opened Sir Reginald's schedule. On the day of his death, one entry was altered. Sir Reginald was meant to be alone between 7:30 and 8. This was not chance, it was necessity. Walsh nodded slowly. "And the clock?"
Poirot smiled. "Ah, the clock. 3 minutes slow on the night of death. 3 minutes slow still. A deliberate adjustment." He turned at last to Mr. Miles. "You were Sir Reginald's secretary," Poirot said quietly. "You knew his habits better than anyone. You adjusted the clocks, you managed the medicines, and you feared change." Mr. Miles's lips tightened. "This is absurd." "Is it?" Poirot asked gently. "Sir Reginald intended to revise his will. An efficiency review was imminent. Your position, your order, was threatened." Walsh stood. "Are you accusing him?" Poirot inclined his head. "I am explaining him." He stepped closer to Mr. Miles. "You did not hate Sir Reginald. You admired him. You believed the system he created was necessary. When that system was endangered, you acted not in rebellion, but in obedience." Mr. Miles's composure cracked. "I only wanted to preserve what worked." "Exactly," Poirot said softly. "You killed the man to preserve his order." Silence fell, heavy and complete. At last, Mr. Miles spoke, his voice low. "He was going to dismiss me. Years of service, discarded for efficiency." "You chose precision over mercy," Poirot replied. "And precision betrayed you." Walsh signalled to the constable. Mr. Miles did not resist as he was led away. Clara covered her face with her hands. Mrs. Pembroke wept quietly. Poirot waited until the door closed, then spoke once more. "Order," he said gently, "is a fine servant, but it is a terrible master." He glanced at the clocks, then reached out and set the slow one right. The ticking resumed, honest and unremarkable. Outside, Belmont House settled into a new rhythm, less rigid, perhaps, but more human. Poirot adjusted his moustaches and smiled faintly. "The little grey cells," he murmured, "prefer balance." And with that, the matter of order and of murder was finally resolved.